details of the headlines every week. And that, as you say, is trickier in today's society than it would have been for the Queen Mother to do. But I also think the Princess of Wales is, I think she's tough in the best way possible. I use that as a compliment in the way I do with the Queen Mother. I think you have to be someone who is prepared to keep, to protect your private life, which the Queen Mother very much did with her husband and her two daughters, and also kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other and just keep going. So that, to me, is probably who I would compare it to. And actually, when I did the book on the Queen Mother, one of the people I interviewed who'd worked for the Queen Mum said they see very clear similarities between the two of them. And I think you kind of see a little bit of that in the way we've spun the Catherine versus Meghan rivalry as sort of like Elizabeth versus Wallis 2.0. It's
right.
We've sort of slotted them back in.
When you say Elizabeth, you mean the Queen Mother?
The Queen Mother, sorry, yeah. And I think, and that's not to say that the comparison is justified. I always sort of defend Meghan a bit and say, she's not doing...
Well, come on, this is pesky. We might as well get into it. if the Queen Mother, Elizabeth, is
Catherine.
Is Catherine, Princess of Wales.
Yep.
She obviously was married to George the Sixth and Edward.
But they did a couple of things in America, like you've been talking about with the Sussexes. They did have tours that aren't tours, that sort of rubbed the royal family up the wrong way, separating the German and the Spanish ones, which of the Spanish stay he had, because they were obviously much more politically incendiary. I think Wallis Simpson has two kinds of personalities, depending on which author you're listening to.
Right.
And in many ways are the two that we ascribe to Meghan. So separating the politics for a minute, Wallis is either presented as someone who was ambitious, loathed her sister-in-law, wanted to be the star player in the monarchy, was very, very difficult to work for, and essentially moved Edward away from being a working member of the royal family. The alternative view of her is that she was someone who never fully understood the monarchy and in many ways was sort of quite badly burned by it and by the British public's attitude towards it that she didn't quite fully process, and that essentially she was someone who dared to remold life on her own terms and to take the steps that she wanted to live, yes, as a duchess and a member of the royal family, a relation of the Windsors, but that she did not want to feel necessarily shackled by that. And in many ways, and this is where I think it gets even more historiographically complicated, the best evidence that we have now, decades and decades after, ways has been slotted into those two personality types, depending on which team you fall on. I tend to think culturally she's being made very similar to Wallis Simpson. I don't know if I buy that they're really that similar as personality types, to be totally honest. But that's from a biographer's perspective. I don't see as many similarities between Meghan and Wallis as I do between Catherine and the Queen Mother.
Well, the events are quite similar, aren't they, between
When I said them in that list, Matt, I was like, maybe I'm just directly contradicting.
You talked yourself into it.
I did. I actually I was like, oh, I'm actually arguing against myself here. Look, the events are not dissimilar.
I remember when Meghan appeared on Oprah Winfrey. I don't know if you remember the imagery there. She was wearing a
dress that was so like Wallis Simpson. Yeah.
And these things often aren't accidental.
No, they're not. Although you can kind of sort of extend that point and say, was there no one, there to say this is uncannily like a very famous photograph of the Duchess of Windsor? Maybe pick something else.
Well, I question how many people they have around them at the moment. I mean, there's been a situation recently, we probably won't touch on it much on the show today, but there's been a situation where they haven't filed paperwork.
Oh, and
their delinquency order, and it's just they don't seem. I'm not entirely sure how planned a lot of the things the Sussex do. That is because it does seem a little bit haphazard behind the scenes sometimes.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll give her a break on the dress, but the general kind of situation, the general kind of taking a prince, or some of the examples you gave there, I think it's right that people can compare to Wallis Simpson.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, one of the things about history is it is the great comparison. You'll always find something, and obviously for me, I like to see people getting involved with it. It's really interesting you say that about who do they have around them, and does it all feel a bit improvised? That does happen to royal families in exile. It's not quite what's happened to them. Although I'm probably about to talk myself back into it. But if you look at some royal families who had lost power, I'm thinking like the royal family of Italy in the 1940s and Greece after the 1970s. Sometimes some of the stuff that they do in the aftermath seems really short term and they haven't quite thought through how it will look. And that's possibly because they just don't have around them the team that they previously had. So it could be the Sussexes are struggling. There isn't really a roadmap for this, is there? I mean, like, okay, there's been the universally disastrous example of Edward Wallace, but in terms of modern royals living in America, having children who are prince and princess, I think there's going to be trial and error with them, to be totally honest. And yes, I do think they could do with an advisor who has experience within the monarchy rather than just within America. But then it's a question of who would that be.
Royals and exiles. History, as you say, is the great... What was your phrase? History is...
Great comparison.
History is the great comparison. Is there any other royal figures that we can touch on that maybe compare to King Charles or maybe Prince William?
Yeah.
I think Charles has started off really well. I was saying this earlier. I think that I was worried about him when he came out of his cancer diagnosis. I was concerned that he'd taken on the job after, I think it was a record number of years. I can't remember how long now, that you had to wait until he eventually got the top job. And I was concerned that maybe his reign would be defined by by Harry, or by the kind of row with Harry and the division between his two sons, you know. But I'm impressed currently by what he's doing. Is there anyone that you think reminds you of in history?
Two, I think, actually within sort of his not immediate family, but within the monarchy's immediate memory would be his grandfather, George VI, who he has spoken of quite a few times. Charles, actually, when he was a young boy, was in Sandringham on the day that George VI died. There's a sort of quite touching story about Queen Mother came into the nursery and was crying because her husband had just passed. And Charles came up and said, you know, don't cry, Granny. And she explained that George had been found when the footman had brought in the tea. And Charles nodded and said, who drank the tea? And that's kind of little things that children focus on. So he's always, I think, had very fond memories of his grandfather. And his grandfather did have to overcome things like a stammer, which many people might remember was really movingly dramatised in the King's Speech. Again, like The Crown, I know it's fiction, but it's a good movie and a good depiction of it. And I think he referenced George VI during his most recent visit to France. The other monarch I would compare him to is Edward VII, who sort of had this record, until Charles III, record-breaking stint as the Prince of Wales to a very popular mother with great longevity, Queen Victoria. And when Edward VII became king in 1901, there were concerns about his health in and around the coronation. In fact, in terms of having to replan a party, Edward VII's coronation had to be rescheduled a couple of days before it happened because his appendix burst. Right. So they went ahead with the meals that were being provided in working class neighbourhoods because all the food was there. But all the potentates and princes had to go home and they had to reschedule it to the next year. And a lot of people thought that it was the same thing that you're saying with Charles III and his battle with cancer, that Edward VII would be defined by illness. And he recovered remarkably, and his reign was short. It was 9 years. He died in May 1910. But he became immensely popular. And there had been concerns with Edward VII because of his life as Prince of Wales. He wasn't going to be suited to being king, and he did prove the naysayers wrong. He was hugely beloved, and when the accounts of his funeral in 1910 are pretty remarkable. Sort of, they're talking about people, you know, sort of crowds, hundreds deep to watch the funeral procession.
Yeah, I wonder who King Charles III kind of looks up to, because I know he's a keen study of history and royal history. So there must be some figures. I can't think of any at the moment. You've pulled out some excellent examples really there of people that he maybe could really use as inspiration in his... And also one of the things, history is not just the great comparison, it's the great warning. You know, sometimes one of the things that institutions like the monarchy have is that it can provide you with people that you don't want to be like. Okay.
And people that you should really, really avoid. Okay. George IV is usually cited as the one that you do not want to be as king from 1820 to 1830, and wildly extravagant, and he sort of was the reverse of Charles. George IV started out as the golden boy, and everyone loved him, and he sort of ate, drank, and slept his way away from that. As you know, it was really probably the closest Britain's come to being a republic was that period in the 1820s with George IV. Another example is like James II in the 1680s. He was very, very stubborn, and he's usually cited as an example of if you don't bend with the wind, you can be uprooted by it completely. So yeah, I think he is a very keen reader of history. The Duchess of Sussex, actually, interestingly, when she married into the family, she mentioned that Charles spoke to her quite a lot about the family history and explained who was who in the portraits. He also takes art very seriously, and that's part and parcel of the imagery and the history of the monarchy. So yeah, I do think I think he's very aware, very, very aware of the history of the institution he's inheriting.
What about William? Because he's the heir to the. You know, there's been so many heirs over the years. I mean, he's in a he's not in the same situation as his father was. But could you see any resemblance with William with past historical figures?
Well, he has two things, or maybe two and a half, that mark him out as different in a positive way. The first is that really it has been it's been quite a long time since there has been an heir, a Prince of Wales, who was known to be the next in line and who was happily married.
Right.
You know, there was the future Elizabeth II was the Duchess of Edinburgh. You know, Charles had a period where he was married to Diana, and then obviously it fell apart very dramatically. So you're going back to really his great-great-grandfather, George V, is the last one of whom you can say that with his wife, Princess Mary, future Queen Mary. The other things that I think are really interesting, just from a historian's perspective, and I think probably from yours as well, of seeing where it will go in the future, is who his mentors were, his political mentor and his emotional mentor.
Right.
So, you know, we know that William had a great amount of time with his grandmother, Elizabeth II. She would have lunches with him. They would speak together often, and she did try to explain the mechanics of the institution he will lead. And learning about the mechanics of monarchy from Elizabeth II must be like learning about music from Mozart. In that sense, he's had a great deal of political and constitutional mentoring from a very successful, very popular monarch, who I would say was sort of a conservative figure with a small c, not in any way linked to the political party, but did not believe in radical change for its sake within the monarchy. One of his emotional mentors, of course, was his late mother. And I think people often tend to forget that, because in the same way we tend to slot the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of Sussex into these historical archetypes, we've kind of done the same with the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex. We now see William as Charles's son and Harry as Diana's son, and we sort of forget where they have similarities to the other parent. You know, William was immensely close to his mother, and Diana was someone who was more of a radical royal compared to Elizabeth II. So he has these two very different influences. And that, I think, makes him exciting as a future king, because potentially, if he welds those two legacies of the sort of the willingness to change that Diana had, but the enthusiasm for tradition that Elizabeth II had, he could prove, I think, hugely successful as King William V.
That's fascinating. I've never really pieced that together in my mind when you combine, you know, the qualities of Charles and the qualities of Diana. I know you'd say that Harry often gets, you know, he often talks about his mother more than William does, I think. But when I see William on jobs, you know, up close, he does remind me of Diana. Although I never saw Diana actually on an engagement, he does, the way he speaks to people, the way his eyes move, the way he moves his head, he actually has more of a resemblance, I think, than Harry does. The way he acts with people as well, generally.
First, let's address the obvious. Both Meghan Markle and Wallis Simpson are American women who married into the British royal family, and that's where the surface-level similarities end. Wallis was vilified for her relationship with Edward VIII, which led to his abdication. The monarchy branded her a villain because Edward chose love over duty. Meghan, on the other hand, faced relentless media harassment and chose to prioritise her mental health and her family's well-being over an outdated institution. History often whispers of striking similarities, drawing parallels across time and space. Two American women, separated by decades, found themselves at the heart of the British monarchy, each leaving an indelible mark on its storied history. Meghan Markle and Wallis Simpson, both divorcees, challenged conventions by captivating the hearts of princes, shaking the very foundations of royal tradition. Their journeys, forever intertwined in the annals of royal history, sparked global fascination and debate, drawing the eyes of the world to their every move. On the surface, their narratives share a common thread: love transcending borders and challenging traditions. But beneath that thread lies a tapestry of complex emotions and societal pressures. However, to conflate their experiences is to disregard the nuances of their individual stories, each shaped by the unique circumstances of their times. While both women were subjected to intense media scrutiny, the contexts and consequences differed greatly, reflecting the evolving nature of media and public perception. The world Meghan entered was vastly different from the one Wallis navigated, with each era presenting its own set of challenges and opportunities. The comparison, though tempting, ultimately diminishes the unique challenges and triumphs that define each woman's legacy, reminding us that history, while often repeating, never does so in exactly the same way. Wallis Simpson's relationship with Edward VIII shook the very foundations of the British monarchy. Their love story was one of the most controversial and talked about events of the 20th century, capturing the attention of people worldwide. His decision to abdicate the throne for love sent shockwaves through the world. It was an unprecedented move that left the British public and the global community in disbelief, forever altering the course of royal history. Wallis, thrust into the spotlight, faced harsh criticism and accusations of manipulating the king. The media frenzy around her was relentless, painting her as a villain in a story of forbidden love and royal duty. Meghan's story unfolded in a different era, yet with strikingly similar themes. As an American actress marrying into the British royal family, she too faced intense scrutiny and public fascination. She married Prince Harry, not the heir apparent, and their union initially sparked joy and celebration. The world watched as they exchanged vows, symbolizing a modern and inclusive future for the monarchy. However, the relentless media intrusion and lack of support from within the institution took a toll. The couple found themselves at the center of a media storm, with every move scrutinized and criticized. The Sussexes' decision to step back from royal duties stemmed from a desire to protect their well-being and forge their own path. They sought a life away from the constant glare of the spotlight, prioritizing their mental health and family. This act, though met with mixed reactions, highlighted their strength and determination to prioritize their family amidst overwhelming pressure. Their journey, much like Wallis and Edward's, is a testament to the enduring power of love and the courage to defy tradition for the sake of personal happiness. The British tabloid press, notorious for its sensationalism, often resorts to harmful labels. Wallis Simpson, branded a social climber and homewrecker, endured relentless negative portrayals. Decades later, Meghan faced similar attacks, often labelled as difficult or demanding. This derogatory nickname, allegedly circulating within palace walls, reflects a blatant attempt to undermine Meghan's character. Ironically, it stands in stark contrast to Prince Philip's own perspective on evolving traditions. The late Duke of Edinburgh, known for his modernising influence, recognised the need for the monarchy to adapt with the times. The Duchess of Difficult label therefore reveals a disconnect between outdated perceptions and the realities of a modern royal family. Meghan Markle's impact extends far beyond the confines of royal engagements. She has become a symbol of modernity and meaningful action, using her influence to address pressing social issues. Her commitment to social justice, gender equality and female empowerment has been evident throughout her public life. Meghan has consistently championed the rights of women and marginalised communities, advocating for a more inclusive and equitable society. From her eloquent speeches at international forums to her hands-on involvement in charitable initiatives, she has consistently used her platform to amplify important causes. Whether it's volunteering at local shelters or speaking at global conferences, Meghan's dedication to making a difference is unwavering. Meghan's modern approach to royal life, marked by authenticity and a willingness to challenge the status quo, resonated with a global audience. Her efforts to break away from traditional norms and embrace a more progressive stance have inspired many to rethink the role of modern royalty. Her advocacy for mental health awareness, a topic often stigmatized, helped break down barriers and encourage open conversations. By sharing her own experiences and supporting mental health initiatives, Meghan has played a crucial role in destigmatizing mental health issues. Her influence extends beyond her charitable endeavours. Meghan's presence at various public engagements and media appearances has brought attention to numerous causes, highlighting the importance of community involvement and social responsibility. Her sartorial choices, often championing sustainable and ethical fashion, have made a statement. By choosing designers who prioritize eco-friendly practices and ethical production, Meghan has set a new standard for fashion in the public eye. Meghan's impact lies in her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, inspiring them to embrace compassion and create positive change. Her genuine interactions and heartfelt speeches have left a lasting impression, encouraging others to take meaningful action in their own communities.